A blank notch on the topographic sheet, a pale, unprinted dip between two ridgelines, and one handwritten warning from an old surveyor's log. Do not enter the valley. Sound fails. That line should have been enough to keep us out. But maps don't like secrets, and neither do I. My name is Ethan Crowley, and I've spent 2 decades following the places people mark with circles and question marks. Sinkholes that swallow roads, canyons that hide aircraft wrecks, forests that ruin compasses. This one was different, not because of what it showed, but because of what it refused to show. Every modern satellite layer blurred the same strip of land as if the world itself had decided it didn't want to be remembered. We approached at first light with Dr. Lila Moreno, a field geologist with a calm voice and sharp eyes, and Rafe Donnelly, my camera operator who could joke his way through a storm. Our guide, Thomas Ibarra, wouldn't step past the last cairn. He only pointed into the pass and said, "If it goes quiet, don't talk, don't shout, just leave." Then we crossed the line. It wasn't gradual. It was instant, like someone slammed a door on the entire world. Wind still pushed against my jacket, but I couldn't hear it. My boots still crushed gravel, but there was no crunch. Even my breath felt wrong, trapped inside my own skull. The human brain is wired to panic when it loses sound. Silence is a predator's advantage, and I felt that ancient alarm flare behind my ribs. Rafe opened his mouth to say something. No voice came out, and that's when Lila's handheld radio flickered, not with static, but with a thin, steady tone that sounded like a warning you could feel in your teeth. The story you just heard is a fictional narrative created for entertainment. We went in for answers, not legends. That's the lie every explorer tells themselves at the start. On paper, our mission was simple: document the Forbidden Valley anomaly, confirm whether the blank area was a cartography error, and collect enough geological and atmospheric data to explain the reports. Missing audio on recordings, corrupted GPS tracks, search parties turning back with no clear reason. The kind of mystery that can be solved with patience, instruments, and daylight. But the valley didn't behave like a normal place. The moment we crossed that invisible boundary, our bodies reacted before our minds could rationalize it. Without sound, your sense of distance collapses. Footsteps don't anchor you. Wind doesn't warn you. You stop trusting the world because the world stops responding the way it should. In that quiet, you can feel your pulse louder than your thoughts, and every small movement becomes suspicious, like you're the only living thing left. Lila tried to test the phenomenon scientifically. She clapped her hands near her ears, watched her instruments, checked air pressure, then looked at me with a tight, controlled expression that said she was worried but refusing to show it. Rafe kept filming, eyes wide, mouthing words I couldn't hear, while his camera's little red light blinked like it was the last normal thing we had. Ahead, the valley floor opened into a bowl of grey grass and black stone, surrounded by cliffs that looked too smooth, polished in long vertical streaks, as if something had scraped them clean. And scattered across the ground were objects that didn't belong: a length of frayed rope, a rusted carabiner, the sun-bleached corner of a plastic cooler, evidence that others had entered and left parts of themselves behind. Before we take another step deeper, subscribe to the channel and hit like, because what happens next is the kind of survival story you don't forget. And tell me in the comments, what country are you watching from right now? Then ask yourself this: if a place can steal sound, what else can it steal without you noticing? We stood at the last cairn like it was a border between reason and rumor. Behind us, the pass still behaved like a normal mountain corridor. Wind tugging at straps, distant birds cutting across the sky, the faint hiss of our jackets whenever we moved. In front of us, the valley waited in broad daylight, calm and open, almost inviting. That contrast was the first trick. Dangerous places rarely look dangerous at the entrance. They look ordinary enough to convince you that the warnings were exaggerated. Thomas Ibarra didn't come any closer. He kept his boots planted on the safe side of the stones, his eyes fixed on the slope that dropped into the basin. "If it goes quiet," he said, voice low, like he didn't want the place to overhear, "don't speak, don't shout, leave." Rafe Donnelly raised his camera and panned from Thomas to me, capturing the tension that made even a simple sentence feel like a prophecy. "Doctor." Lila Moreno stood to my right with her pack straps cinched tight, chin slightly lifted the way she did when she was focusing on data instead of fear. I nodded at Thomas. "We mark the boundary, and we're back before dusk." Thomas's mouth tightened. He looked past me, into the valley, and shook his head once. "People always say that." Then I stepped forward. The silence hit like a physical force, as if air itself had thickened. One moment the wind existed, and the next it was gone, not in sensation, but in sound. I felt the gust against my cheeks, saw grass ripple in a wide green wave, but heard nothing. My boot slid on gravel, and my brain waited for the crunch that never came. I turned sharply, expecting to see something, some wall, some shimmer, some obvious sign of crossing an invisible line. There was nothing. The world looked the same, but it did not behave the same. Rafe followed me in, and his lips moved immediately, reflexively. A joke, probably. He was the kind of man who threw humor at discomfort like it was a flare gun. Only this time, no sound came out. His eyes widened as he realized it, and he pressed a hand to his throat, then tried again, shaping words that stayed trapped inside his mouth. Lila stepped across last, cautious, and the moment she did, her shoulders rose slightly as if her body braced for impact. She didn't speak. Instead, she pulled her handheld radio up, thumbed the button, and watched the screen. The radio didn't crackle. It didn't hiss. It flickered once, then emitted a thin, unwavering tone. Not loud, not soft, just present. I couldn't decide whether I was hearing it with my ears or feeling it through bone. Lila's brow creased. She adjusted the frequency. The tone remained. I lifted my own radio. Same tone. The valley wasn't silent after all. It simply chose what would be allowed through. We exchanged looks, no words, no voices. But communication is older than speech. A quick tap to the chest, me. A gesture outward, go. Lila pointed to her ear, then shook her head. No sound. Rafe held his camera up and gave a small, nervous thumbs up, as if filming could keep things under control. We started down. The slope was steep enough that we took it in careful switchbacks, using trekking poles to keep balance. I could feel each footstep in my legs, the subtle vibration of impact traveling through muscle and bone, but the absence of sound made every move feel wrong, like walking in a dream where your body is slightly delayed. Halfway down, I turned back to look for Thomas. He was still at the cairn, a dark silhouette against bright rock. He didn't wave. He didn't call. He just stared. And for a moment, I felt the strange certainty that he wasn't watching us. He was watching what was watching us. At the bottom, the valley floor opened into a shallow bowl. Grey-green grass grew in thick mats, broken by patches of black stone that looked melted and rehardened. The cliffs surrounding the basin were too smooth in places, vertical streaks that resembled long, polished scars. Not the kind of erosion you expect from wind and rain alone. Lila crouched immediately and pressed a palm to the ground, then pulled a small probe from her pack. She took readings with quick, practiced motions, her face calm but her breathing visible in the tightness around her eyes. Rafe walked a slow circle, camera rolling, capturing wide shots. He pointed toward the cliffs and mimed a question. What caused that? Then shrugged when no answer could be spoken. I focused on the practical. We had daylight, water, food, thermal blankets, flares, a satellite beacon, and 3 days of supplies. We weren't reckless amateurs. We were experienced, prepared, and still. The silence made us feel like trespassers. That's when I noticed the first object that didn't belong. A length of rope lay half buried in grass near a stone patch, sun-bleached and frayed, one end knotted as if it had been tied to something heavy. I approached slowly, eyes scanning for the rest of it, or for whatever it had once been attached to. Rafe moved closer too, filming, his expression shifting from anxious to intent. Evidence was comforting. Evidence meant humans had been here before. Evidence meant this place was real, not supernatural. But then I saw the carabiner. Rust red, bent slightly, the gate jammed half open. It was the kind climbers use, the kind that holds lives on cliffs. A small thing, but finding it here on a valley floor, far from any climbing route, felt like stumbling across a tooth in the dirt. Lila approached, and for the first time since we entered, she mouthed words with intensity. I read her lips carefully. Not weathered enough. She pointed to the rust, then to the rope fibers. Fresh damage beneath old discoloration, recent stress, recent tearing. Someone had used this not long ago, and something had forced it to fail. I stood up straight and looked around. The valley was wide enough that you should have been able to see across it clearly. But the air above the basin had a faint distortion, like heat shimmer, except the temperature wasn't high. It was crisp, almost cold. And there were no birds, no insects, no small movements in the grass, only wind you could feel but not hear. Rafe shifted beside me, and I realized he was doing what I was doing, listening with his eyes, searching for cues that sound normally provides. He pointed his camera toward a darker patch near the base of the cliff, where the grass seemed pressed down in a circular pattern. A nest, a campsite. We walked toward it in a tight formation, close enough that a sudden threat wouldn't isolate one of us. I kept my hand near the bear spray strapped to my chest, though I didn't know what I expected to spray in a place that didn't even allow screams. The flattened circle wasn't a campsite, it was a ring of stones, small black rocks arranged deliberately, each one placed with the kind of care that implies ritual or warning. In the center sat something that made my stomach tighten. A notebook. Its cover was dark, water-stained, edges curled. It looked like it had been left there on purpose. Not dropped, not lost. Placed. Rafe crouched, reaching toward it, but I grabbed his wrist before he could touch it. He looked up at me, irritation flashing. Then he saw my expression and froze. Because just beyond the ring of stones, in the grass, there was another object. A boot. Not ancient. Not decayed. Modern hiking boot, one lace still tied, the other dangling loose. The leather was scuffed, dirty, but intact. I stared at it, and my mind did what it always does in survival situations. It ran probabilities. A boot means someone took it off, or someone lost it, or someone was separated from it by force. I looked for the second boot. There wasn't one. Lila stepped closer, and her face changed. She didn't have to speak for me to understand what she was thinking. If someone had been here recently enough for that boot to still look like a boot, then we weren't investigating an old mystery. We were walking into an active one. Rafe lifted his camera toward the notebook again, silently pleading to capture the discovery. I hesitated, then nodded once. We couldn't ignore it. Information could be the difference between leaving safely and becoming another scattered artifact. He reached in carefully, as if the ring of stones might bite. The moment his fingertips brushed the notebook cover, the radio tone in my chest strap changed. It didn't grow louder, it shifted, like a needle sliding on a record. And for the first time since we entered the valley, I heard something else. A faint, distant thump. Not a sound in the air, more like a vibration traveling through the ground into my bones. One thump, a pause, then another. Lila's eyes snapped to mine. Rafe froze with the notebook half lifted, and the grass around the ring of stones began to move, not with wind, but as if something large was passing beneath it, circling us just out of sight. The grass didn't wave the way wind makes it wave. It bulged, A slow pressure rolled beneath the grey-green blades, as if the ground itself had lungs, lifting, settling, lifting again, circling the ring of stones with deliberate patience. I felt it through my boots first, a faint rise, like standing on a mattress that someone else was gently pressing from below. Then the radio tone in my chest strap sharpened again, sliding half a note higher, and a dull nausea flickered behind my eyes. Rafe's fingers were still on the notebook. He looked up at me, frozen, eyebrows raised in a silent question. Lila didn't move toward the center. She moved away from it, carefully, heel to toe. Her focus snapped from mystery to hazard, the way a good field scientist becomes a survivor when the environment stops behaving. I reached for Rafe's shoulder and pulled him back one step. He resisted for half a second, camera instinct fighting caution. Then he felt the subtle lift underfoot and his face tightened. The notebook slipped from his fingertips and landed back inside the ring with a soft motion we couldn't hear. But we watched it hit, watched the grass around it tremble, and that was enough. Another thump traveled up through the ground, stronger than the first. The ring of stones shivered. Not visually dramatic, just a small, unmistakable twitch, like something beneath had nudged them from below. A thin crack appeared in the dirt near the boot, no wider than a coin edge, but it wasn't there a minute ago. Lila's eyes were locked on that crack. She pointed to her ears, then to her jaw, then mimed dizziness with a slow roll of her hand. Her lips formed a single word I could read clearly. Infrasound. Low-frequency vibration. The kind you don't really hear so much as your body absorbs it. Your inner ear, your chest cavity, your teeth. Enough of it can make you nauseous, disoriented, anxious for no obvious reason. It can even create the sensation of pressure, of being watched, of impending doom. People blame ghosts when it's physics. People blame monsters when it's geology. I nodded once, not because everything made sense, but because it was the first real anchor we'd had since crossing the cairn. If the valley was generating a sustained low-frequency tone, through wind funneling into rock hollows, through a resonance chamber hidden in those smooth cliffs, it could mask ordinary sound and overload our hearing until it felt like silence. But it didn't explain the ground. Rafe lifted his camera again, framing the crack, the ring, the notebook. His eyes flicked to me, asking permission without sound. I motioned him back another step, and then pointed the lens toward the cliff base, where the grass seemed to pulse the most. If something was moving, I wanted it documented, but I wanted us standing on ground that wasn't about to open. We retreated 10 yards, then 20, careful not to break formation. The wave in the grass followed, slower now, like the pressure was searching for us. My instinct screamed to run, but running on unstable ground is how people die in a panic. Ankles snapped, falls, uncontrolled choices. We moved with discipline, and I forced my breathing into a steady rhythm even as my stomach churned. Then the valley gave us a clear message. The crack by the ring widened abruptly, not with a tearing sound because sound was still absent, but with visible speed. It spidered outward in 3 directions. The boot shifted as the earth beneath it sank a fraction of an inch, then another, and the ring of stones collapsed inward like a trapdoor had been pulled. The notebook vanished first, swallowed in a clean, sudden drop. The boot followed, tipping heel up and then disappearing as the ground folded into a narrow, dark slit. Rafe's mouth opened in a silent shout. Lila's hand flew to her chest strap. I felt my own heart slam once against my ribs so hard it made me dizzy. A sinkhole, not a dramatic crater, something worse. A long, hungry fissure that opened and closed with those periodic thumps, like the earth was flexing. The grass concealed it until the last second, making it look safe, making it look ordinary, until you stepped into it and became another artifact. Lila crouched where we stood, keeping her weight low and spread. She slid her probe into the ground, watching her instrument readout with tight concentration. She looked up and mouthed, "Hollow." Lava tubes, I thought, or a collapsed subterranean channel. If the cliffs were basaltic, Old volcanic flows could have left tubes beneath the valley floor, voids that sometimes collapse without warning. Add meltwater, add freeze-thaw, add erosion, and you get a landscape that can swallow a person like a mouth. But why the silence? Why the tone? Why the missing map detail? Rafe gestured toward the fissure, then mimed someone falling. I nodded. The boot had been a warning. The ring of stones wasn't ritual. It was a marker. Someone had arranged stones to say, "Here, this is where the ground breaks," and the notebook, it wasn't dropped, it had been left as a message. I scanned the grass for the other boot again, the second half of the pair that should have been there. My eyes caught something I hadn't noticed before, faint scuff marks in the grass leading away from the ring, like someone had crawled or been dragged. Dragged. The line ended at a patch of black stone where the grass thinned. The stone looked smoother than the rest, almost glassy, with a shallow groove worn into it as if something heavy had been pulled across it repeatedly. Rafe followed my gaze and panned his camera along the scuff marks, his expression tightening with each step we took. Lila raised her hand and held up 2 fingers, then pointed to the cliff face. 2 options: retreat to Thomas or push deeper to find stable ground and answers. I looked back toward the pass. We could still see the cairn, small now, like a punctuation mark at the edge of this silent paragraph. Thomas was no longer visible. Whether he'd stepped back or whether the shimmer had eaten him, I couldn't tell. And that was the moment my satellite beacon blinked once, green to red, then went dead. No warning text, no gradual loss, just a sudden, absolute failure, as if something in the valley had finally decided we didn't need a lifeline. My throat went dry. I held the device up so the others could see. Rafe's eyes widened, and his grip on the camera tightened hard enough that his knuckles turned pale. Lila stared at the beacon, then tapped her radio again, cycling frequencies. The thin tone persisted. It was the only signal that didn't care what we did. I made the call with a gesture. We move to the rock patches, stay off the thick grass, and we find the notebook if it's reachable, because whatever it said might be the difference between walking out and becoming the next missing detail on a map. We advanced carefully along the black stone islands, like stepping stones over a dangerous river. Every time my boot touched grass, I felt the ground respond with a subtle delay, like a skin stretched over something unstable. On the rock, the vibration felt clearer. The periodic thumps weren't random, they had a rhythm. Roughly every 30 seconds a pulse came through the ground. Lila watched her instrument timing it, lips counting silently. 30, 31, 30. Her face tightened at the pattern, and she looked at the cliff base again with a new kind of fear. Fear of something mechanical, something repeatable. Because nature can be rhythmic. But this was too steady. We reached the edge of the fissure area, keeping a safe distance from where the ring had collapsed. The slit in the ground was still there, narrower now, like the earth had clenched shut after swallowing its offering. A faint gap remained, just wide enough to see darkness below. Rafe crouched and aimed his lens down into it, using the camera's light. The beam cut into the black and revealed nothing for a second, then caught something pale, wedged against the side. Paper. The notebook hadn't fallen deep. It had jammed partway down, caught on a lip of rock like a snagged flag. I exhaled slowly, then pulled out the coil of paracord from my pack. I tied a loop, then clipped a small metal hook I carried for gear repairs. Lila held the cord steady while I lay flat on the rock, extending my arm toward the fissure, keeping my weight distributed. The gap smelled wrong. Even without sound, your body still reads air. A sour, mineral scent rose from below, mixed with something like wet metal. I lowered the hook carefully until it caught the notebook's spine. It took 2 tries. On the third, the hook snagged. I pulled gently inch by inch, resisting the urge to yank. As the notebook scraped upward, the radio tone changed again, subtle but real. My teeth ached. My vision shimmered for half a second at the edges. Lila's eyes darted to the cliff, then back to me, like she was measuring whether retrieving the notebook was worth provoking whatever physics lived here. I pulled the notebook free and slid it onto the rock beside me. Rafe leaned in immediately, camera tight on the cover. The notebook was heavier than it should have been, waterlogged and stiff. I opened it carefully, wary of tearing pages that might hold crucial information. The first page had a name written in block letters, E. Hartwell below it, a date, smudged but readable enough, a recent year, not decades ago, not an old expedition. And under that, 3 words, underlined so hard the paper was scored, "Do not listen." I frowned. Then I flipped the page. Most of the writing was messy, hurried, as if Hartwell's hand had been shaking, but one paragraph stood out, written slower, more deliberate. "The valley steals audio by giving you something else. The tone isn't empty, it's a mask. It changes your head. It changes what you notice. When you think it's quiet, you get careless. The ground opens where the grass looks thickest. We mark the first break with stones. If you find this, it means I didn't make it back to the pass." My pulse thudded in my ears, louder than the valley. I turned the notebook so Lila could read. Her expression hardened with each line. Then she pointed to the cliff streaks again and mouthed 2 words I didn't like. Artificial wear. The smooth scars on the cliff weren't just erosion. Rafe's camera tracked to the cliffs as if pulled. He zoomed in on one polished vertical section, and I saw it too. Faint parallel lines, evenly spaced, too consistent to be random. Like something had been dragged up and down the rock repeatedly, like cables. I looked higher, squinting against the light, and caught a faint glint near a ledge. Something angular, metallic, barely visible against stone. Not a natural feature. Equipment. Before I could signal the others, another thump hit, stronger than the last, and this time the rock beneath us vibrated hard enough that my elbows slipped. The notebook skidded toward the grass edge. I lunged and caught it, fingers closing just in time. Rafe's footing shifted. His left boot touched grass by mistake. The ground responded instantly. The skin of the valley gave way under his heel, and his leg dropped to the knee in a silent collapse. His eyes went wide with shock as he pitched forward, both hands flinging out instinctively, camera still strapped, but swinging dangerously. I grabbed his shoulder strap and hauled backward, while Lila seized his pack strap from the other side. Together, we pulled him free, but the hole his leg had punched into the grass didn't close. It widened. A crack raced outward, splitting the ground in a jagged line that pointed straight toward the cliff base, like an arrow drawn by the earth. And from that direction, the grass began to bulge again, faster now, converging on the line, as if something beneath the valley had sensed our mistake and was coming to finish the job. Rafe's face had the kind of panic that doesn't need sound to be loud. His boot came out of the sudden hole, slick with dark mud, and the grass around that opening quivered like irritated skin. The crack that had shot outward didn't stop at the first split. It branched, jagged and fast, tracing a path across the valley floor toward the cliff base, toward the polished scars and that faint metallic glint above the ledge. Lila grabbed Rafe's sleeve, forcing his attention away from the hole and toward the rock islands. She pointed sharply, "Stay on stone." I tightened my grip on the notebook and took the lead, stepping onto the nearest black slab with careful, flat-footed pressure. The rock felt cold through the soles, steadier than anything under grass. Another thump came through the ground, strong enough to blur my vision at the edges for a heartbeat. The radio tone rose with it, then settled again into that thin, tooth-humming line. The valley wasn't quiet anymore, not to my body. It was full of sensation that my instincts couldn't categorize, and that was the most dangerous kind of environment. We moved along the stone patches in a diagonal line, trying to keep distance from the crack. The bulging pressure beneath the grass followed the fissure as if it had found a channel. The movement wasn't random. It hugged the split like something traveling under it, using the broken earth as a path. Rafe kept filming even while he moved. His camera swung toward the cliff repeatedly, like his mind was stuck on the same question as mine. What was up there? At the base of the cliff, the grass thinned into broken gravel, and the black stone became more continuous. A band of hardened material that looked like old lava flow. We reached it and stopped, pressing ourselves close to the rock face as if it might shield us. Lila's eyes tracked the vertical polish marks. Up close, they were undeniable, parallel grooves, evenly spaced, running straight up the cliff, like something had been hauled repeatedly. Between them were faint scuffs that looked like abrasion from rubber or coated cable. Not the random work of centuries of weather. This was use, habit, routine. I lifted the notebook, flipped pages quickly, scanning for anything else Hartwell had written about the cliffs. The handwriting grew more frantic midway through, like time had become precious. "The scars go up to a ledge," one line read. "There's a box. Don't touch it. Don't look straight at the—" The sentence stopped there. Ink smeared hard, as if the pen had dragged off the page. My stomach tightened. I looked up at the ledge where I'd seen the glint. From this angle it was clearer, a small structure bolted into the stone, partly hidden by shadow. A metal bracket, maybe a platform, and something else, thin lines stretching downward in a fan pattern that caught light intermittently. Cables. Lila touched my elbow, then pointed to the base of the cliff to our left. There, tucked behind a boulder, was a shape that didn't match the geology. A panel, flat and rectangular, half buried in gravel. Its surface was scratched and dusty. A solar panel. My mouth went dry. No one installs a solar panel in a forbidden valley for harmless reasons. We approached in a tight cluster, feet planted only on rock and gravel. The panel was connected by a thick, weatherproof cable that ran into the boulder's shadow. I followed it with my eyes and found the source. A metal equipment case, the size of a large cooler, strapped to an iron spike driven into the ground. The case had vents on the side and a locking clasp, the kind of box meant to protect electronics from weather and animals. Rafe lowered his camera toward it, then looked at me. I could see the argument forming in his face. The footage would be gold. Proof. But proof had a price in places like this. Lila shook her head hard. No. Then she did something that surprised me. She crouched and placed her probe against the ground near the equipment case, not touching the box, just measuring around it. Her instrument screen flickered. She frowned, then pressed the probe to the rock again, closer. Her lips formed a word I read easily. Active. The thump hit again, right on schedule. This time, the metal case vibrated faintly, visible in a subtle tremor of dust on its surface. And in that moment, the radio tone shifted from a steady line into a brief oscillation, like it was responding, syncing, talking. The valley didn't just generate a phenomenon, something was running it. Rafe's hand drifted toward the latch anyway, pulled by the same human flaw that has killed 1,000 explorers. If you can open the box, you can end the mystery. I caught his wrist and squeezed hard enough to make him wince. He stared at me, eyes flashing anger and fear, and I shook my head once. Not yet. I leaned in close to the equipment case without touching it, searching for markings. There were none. No company logo, no serial number, just a strip of tape that had once held a label, now torn away. I shifted slightly to peer behind the box, and my blood went cold. There was a fresh footprint in the gravel. Not ours. The tread was crisp, the edges sharp, like it had been made hours ago, not days. It pointed along the cliff band, leading toward a narrow gap where two boulders created a dark passage. Someone was here. Recently. And they had been walking comfortably in the valley that was trying to swallow us. Another thump rolled through the ground, stronger than the last, and the gravel beneath us jittered. The crack line out in the grass pulsed as if it had a heartbeat. I glanced back toward the valley floor and saw the bulge traveling again, faster now, aiming toward the cliff band like it was being drawn to the equipment. Lila's eyes followed mine. She pointed to the dark gap between the boulders. then tapped her temple. Think, shelter, stable ground, maybe a tunnel. We had a choice. Stay exposed on the cliff band, where whatever was beneath the grass could still reach us, or move into the passage where the terrain might be more solid, and where someone else had just gone. I forced my breathing slow and made the call. We go into the gap. The passage was tighter than it looked from a distance. The boulders rose on either side like jaws, and the air between them felt cooler. The radio tone didn't disappear, but it softened, as if the stone muffled the worst of the resonance. My teeth stopped aching as sharply. My vision steadied. We moved single file, my hand brushing the rock for balance. The ground underfoot changed from gravel to a smoother surface, hard, continuous stone, a relief so strong it almost felt like safety. Almost, because after 10 steps the passage opened into a shallow recess in the cliff, a man-made alcove carved into the rock, edges squared off in a way no natural fracture would produce. Inside, against the back wall, was a ladder bolted to stone, leading upward toward the ledge where the cables disappeared. Rafe's eyes widened, his camera swung to capture it, lens trembling slightly with adrenaline. Lila reached out and touched the ladder with one finger, then pulled back quickly, as if even metal might betray us. She looked at me, lips moving carefully. "Up there," she mouthed. "Box," the same word Hartwell had used. I swallowed and glanced back toward the passage entrance. From here, we couldn't see the valley floor, but we could still feel it. Another thump came, muted by rock, like a distant drum behind a wall. The timing was still perfect. 30 seconds. Whatever was running this wasn't improvising. It was scheduled. I placed the notebook against my chest and started up the ladder. Each rung felt solid. The bolts were clean, not ancient. Maintained. Someone expected to climb this. Someone had climbed it recently enough to leave that crisp footprint outside. And as I climbed, the radio tone began to sharpen again, as if we were approaching its source. Halfway up, I stopped and looked down. Lila stood at the base, one hand on the ladder, eyes fixed on me. Rafe hovered behind her, filming upward. Their faces were tense, but steady. I kept climbing. At the top, the ladder ended at a narrow ledge wide enough for one person to stand. From here, the valley spread out below like a muted painting. The shimmer in the air was clearer at this height, an almost invisible haze that warped distance. And on the ledge, bolted to the cliff exactly as Hartwell had written, was a metal box the size of a suitcase. This one did have a marking. Not a company logo, something worse. A stenciled symbol partially scratched away, and beneath it a warning label faded by sun. A triangle with an exclamation point, the universal language of danger. I didn't touch it. I leaned in close, searching for vents, for a power line, for anything that explained how it worked. A thick cable ran from the box down the cliff, disappearing into the alcove below, connecting to the equipment case near the solar panel. Another cable ran sideways along the ledge, into a narrow crack in the rock, as if it fed into the cliff itself. And then I saw the third component. A circular plate, like a speaker or a resonator, mounted facing outward over the valley. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a dinner plate, but its surface was patterned with concentric rings, and at its center was a dark aperture. I felt the vibration in my chest intensify, just by standing near it. My breathing became shallow without my permission, my palms dampened. The body knows when it's close to something that can hurt it, even if the mind doesn't understand the mechanism. I looked down and signaled to Lila and Rafe. "Stay. Wait." Then, against every warning in the notebook and every instinct in my bones, I shifted closer to read what was etched near the resonator's mounting bolts. The letters were small, shallow, almost hidden under grime. I wiped gently with my sleeve. A model number. A technical term I recognized from a documentary I'd once filmed near a research facility. A type of acoustic transducer designed to emit frequencies below human hearing. Infrasound. A man-made infrasound emitter aimed at the valley floor. My pulse pounded. The silence wasn't a mystery of nature, it was engineered. And as that realization hit, my radio tones snapped into a new pattern. Short pulses layered over the steady line, like a coded signal. I froze and looked toward the alcove below. Lila's eyes had widened. Rafe was pointing his camera toward the passage entrance with frantic urgency, his mouth forming a single word over and over. Someone. A shadow moved across the gap between the boulders. Not the slow bulge beneath grass. A human silhouette, upright, steady, stepping into the recess with the confidence of someone who belonged here. The figure paused, head tilted slightly as if listening to something we couldn't hear, and lifted a hand toward the ladder. Then a second figure appeared behind the first, and a third. I stood on the ledge, exposed and trapped above them, while the radio pulses hammered at my skull like a countdown, and the first figure began climbing, rung by rung, straight toward me. The first climber moved like he'd done it 100 times, hands placed with certainty, boots finding rungs without hesitation. He wore a matte grey jacket and a hood pulled low, but it wasn't the clothing that made my stomach tighten. It was the calm. People don't move calmly in a place that swallows the ground. Not unless they know exactly where it bites and where it doesn't. The radio pulses hammered in my skull, and the infrasound plate at my side seemed to breathe with them. I forced myself to think like a survivor, not a storyteller. I was pinned on a narrow ledge with a cliff at my back, an engineered device at my shoulder, and strangers climbing up to meet me. I raised my hands where they could see them, palms out. Not surrender, clarity. I wasn't a threat. I was also not an easy target. The climber paused a few rungs below the ledge and looked up. I couldn't hear his voice, but I could see the movement of his jaw. He said something to the figures below, two others in similar gear, faces obscured, posture controlled. Then he climbed the last rungs and stepped onto the ledge with the careful balance of someone who understood that a fall here would be final. He lifted a hand and pointed at my radio. I hesitated for half a second, then unclipped it and held it out. Not because I trusted him, because I wanted his eyes on the device in my hand, not on the bear spray strapped to my chest. He took the radio, studied it, then glanced at the emitter. His gaze flicked to the etched model number I'd wiped clean. A subtle shift in his expression, annoyance maybe. He hadn't expected me to understand what I was looking at. He motioned for me to step away from the box. The ledge barely allowed two bodies to pass without brushing shoulders. I shifted right, keeping my back close to stone. He stepped in toward the emitter, and with a small tool, something like a key, he opened a panel on the side. The radio pulses intensified, then settled into a steadier rhythm. He was tuning it. Below, Lila stood at the base of the ladder with her head tilted up, face tight with controlled fear. Rafe held his camera steady, filming the men, filming me, filming the machine. Even in silence, you can tell when someone is fighting the urge to shout. The climber on the ledge looked at me again and spoke slowly, exaggerating his mouth movements so I could read him. Do not touch. I stared back and mouthed my own words, forcing them to be clear. Who are you? He didn't answer. He gestured toward the ladder and made a sharp downward motion. Go down! It wasn't a request. I could have fought. I could have tried to spray him. I could have lunged for the device, ripped cables, smashed the plate. But fighting on a ledge that narrow is how people slip. And if I slipped, it didn't matter what truth I'd uncovered. There would be no one to tell it. I nodded once, slow, and began climbing down. As I descended, the man above watched me with eyes that never softened. The other two at the base stepped back to give me space, but not respect, control. One of them had a side pouch bulging with tools. The other had a compact device strapped to his chest, blinking a faint blue light. Technology that worked inside the valley. That fact alone was a cold knife in my mind. When my boots hit the alcove floor, the man with the blinking device stepped forward and pointed at Rafe's camera. His hand made a slicing motion across his throat. "Stop filming." Rafe's jaw clenched. He didn't stop. The man's posture changed instantly. He reached for the camera like it was a weapon. I stepped between them, shaking my head hard at Rafe, then mimed lowering it. Not giving it up, just lowering. Rafe hesitated, eyes angry. Then he lowered the lens toward the ground. The man didn't look satisfied, but he didn't escalate. Not yet. Lila moved closer to me, careful, and her lips formed a question. Security? I didn't know, but the gear wasn't military standard, and they weren't acting like law enforcement. They were acting like technicians protecting a project. The man with tools pointed toward the passage entrance, the gap between boulders. His gesture was firm. "Move, all of you." We walked. The passage beyond the boulders tightened again, then opened not into daylight, but into a darker corridor that hadn't been visible before. A concealed entry, masked by shadows and rock. As we approached, I realized the natural crack in the cliff was too straight, too clean. A door had been cut into stone. One of the men pressed his palm to a small plate near the edge. A faint light blinked. The door released with a subtle shift, almost seamless, and we stepped into a man-made tunnel. The air inside was cooler and smelled of metal, dust, and something chemical, like old batteries. The walls were smooth, reinforced, and the floor sloped gently downward. Strips of low lighting ran along the base of the wall, dim but steady. Inside the tunnel, something changed in my body. The pressure in my teeth eased. The dizziness softened. The radio tone, still present, moved from being inside my bones to being more distant, like a sound you can finally place outside yourself. Lila noticed too. Her shoulders lowered slightly. She swallowed and mouthed, "Shielded." We were inside the source's shelter. Whatever was creating the valley effect was outside, but this tunnel was protected from it. That meant whoever built this had planned for the consequences. The man in front led us deeper until we reached a broader chamber where the tunnel widened into a room carved into the mountain. It wasn't huge, but it held racks of equipment, monitors, power units, coils of cable, ruggedized cases, sensor arrays. A map of the valley was pinned to a board with handwritten notations. A stack of notebooks sat on a metal table. Field logs like Hartwell's. My eyes snapped to those books. Proof. The lead man turned and pointed to a marked square on the floor, an area cleared like a designated spot for visitors. He wanted us there, contained. We stepped into the square. The third man, taller, shoulders broader, walked to a monitor and tapped it. A live feed appeared. An aerial view of the valley floor, grainy but unmistakable, with overlays showing grid lines and zones. Dots flickered. Sensor readings. And in the corner, a timer counting down in seconds. 30 seconds. The pulses. A scheduled cycle. The tall man pointed at the timer, then at his chest, then at the valley feed. He spoke, slow and deliberate. Control. I read it clearly. He pointed at the valley floor's grass zones, then drew a finger across his neck. Danger. Then he pointed at the black stone patches and the cliff band. Safe. They were managing risk, like a machine manages heat, directing it, shaping it. Lila's eyes were locked on the monitors now, her fear mixing with something sharper. Anger. Her lips formed words, but she stopped herself, then mouthed them again, quieter. Illegal. She gestured toward the equipment, toward the hidden door, toward the blank area on the map pinned beside the monitor. Someone had built a controlled hazard and then erased it from public knowledge. I leaned forward slightly, slow enough not to trigger the men, and pointed at the stack of notebooks. Then I pointed at my own notebook, Hartwell's, still tucked against my chest. I held it up. The lead technician's eyes narrowed. He reached for the notebook without asking. I didn't let go. His posture stiffened. I took a breath and mouthed, carefully, forcing him to see each word. E. Hartwell. Where? The man stared at me, then glanced at the others. A silent exchange passed between them. The tall man took a step closer and made a small gesture with his fingers. Wait. He walked to a cabinet on the far wall, unlocked it, and pulled out a hard case. He placed it on the table and opened it. Inside were personal effects, a crushed GPS unit, a broken phone sealed in a plastic bag, a wallet, and a boot. The missing boot. Not torn, not chewed, just recovered, cleaned, catalogued. My stomach turned. The tall man pointed to the boot, then to the monitors, then drew a line downward with his finger and closed his fist. Down. Gone. Then he pointed to the valley map and tapped a spot near the Ring of Stones area. That was where it happened. Lila's face changed, pain flickering through her controlled exterior. She mouthed one word, bitter and precise. Containment. That's what this was. Not research for curiosity, not geology. A controlled field where something could be tested, sound suppression, disorientation, terrain destabilization, without witnesses. And Hartwell had become a variable they couldn't afford to let walk away. Rafe lifted his camera slightly, instinctively. The lead technician saw it and stepped forward. This time he didn't just gesture. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a compact device, rectangular with a small antenna. He pressed a button. Rafe's camera screen went black. Not a battery failure, an instantaneous dead screen. The red recording light extinguished like it had been pinched out. Rafe's face twisted with fury and disbelief. He slammed the side of the camera once with his palm, as if anger could revive it. The technicians watched without emotion. Their technology could kill ours with a click. My mind raced. No beacon, no radio, no camera, no outside help. If they decided we weren't leaving, we would become another set of objects in a box. I looked around the chamber for anything that didn't belong. A ventilation shaft, a second door, a sign of routine human life. There was a cot in a corner, a thermos, a set of gloves hung neatly on a hook. Someone stayed here. Someone lived in this darkness, maintaining the machine that made the valley a trap. Then I saw it, almost hidden behind a rack of equipment. A second exit, not a door. A tunnel mouth, narrower, leading upward at a steeper angle, with scuff marks on the floor from frequent use. The technicians hadn't blocked it. They assumed we couldn't reach it. They assumed we were controlled. I caught Lila's eye and tilted my head slightly toward that tunnel. She saw it. Her expression didn't change, but her fingers flexed once, the smallest sign of readiness. I caught Rafe's eye next and made a subtle motion. Stay calm. He nodded, jaw tight. The tall technician stepped closer to us and pointed at the hidden door we'd come through. He mouthed, out. Not freedom, removal. He wanted to escort us back to the valley boundary, back to the cairn, after taking whatever notes he needed from Hartwell's notebook and ensuring we couldn't record anything. A controlled release, which meant we had a small window of movement, when they were focused on guiding us, not restraining us. We started back toward the entry door. The technicians formed a tight triangle around us, one in front, one behind, one near the side. Close enough to react, far enough to avoid being grabbed easily. Professional spacing. But professional spacing relies on predictability. At the threshold, the tall technician reached for the door control plate. I acted. I feigned a stumble, just a half step into the side rack, enough to make a metal coil roll off its shelf and clatter silently to the floor. The motion still drew attention. Eyes flicked to the falling equipment, hands moved. In that fraction of a second, Lila lunged toward the upward tunnel. Rafe went with her. I pivoted and slammed my shoulder into the technician nearest me, not trying to knock him out, just to knock him off balance. He hit the wall, arms flailing for grip, and for the first time his calm cracked into surprise. We ran. The upward tunnel was steep and narrow, forcing us into single file. Lila led, climbing fast, hands on stone, boots scraping for traction. Rafe followed, dragging his dead camera like a useless limb. I brought up the rear, listening with my eyes, feeling for vibrations, expecting hands to grab my pack straps. Behind us, the technicians gave chase, their boots striking the floor in silent rhythm. Even without sound, pursuit has a cadence you can feel. The tunnel angled upward, then turned sharply left. The air changed, less chemical, more earthy. A faint draft brushed my face, fresh and cold. An exit ahead. Lila burst around the corner and slowed abruptly, raising a hand. Stop! I nearly collided with Rafe as he halted. Ahead was a grate, metal bars set into stone, behind which a thin slice of daylight showed. Not a wide opening, not freedom, a vent-like exit, perhaps to a hidden ravine above the valley. And it was locked. Lila's hands flew to the bars, testing them. They didn't budge. Rafe's face tightened. He mouthed, "No." My heart hammered. Behind us, the technicians closed in. I forced myself to look beyond the grate. Outside, the rock face dropped steeply. If we could get through, we might be able to climb down along a natural ledge system, dangerous but real. Better than being escorted out with our memories and our evidence erased. Lila pointed to the lock mechanism. A simple latch, but reinforced. She mouthed, "Tools." We didn't have time. The nearest technician rounded the corner, arm extended, device in hand. His eyes were cold, and in that moment, the valley itself intervened. A massive thump rolled through the mountain, far stronger than any we'd felt, like the pulse cycle had spiked. The tunnel walls vibrated. Dust shook loose from overhead. The technician stumbled, bracing a hand against the stone. Lila's eyes widened as her instruments, still clipped to her strap, flickered wildly. The infrasound system outside had surged. Maybe our sprint had triggered a sensor. Maybe the technicians had triggered a higher output setting. Maybe the machine was compensating for a disturbance. Whatever the reason, the pulse rattled the grate, the latch shuddered, and a crack appeared in the stone around the frame. Small, but real. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the nearest loose metal pipe wedged against the tunnel wall, part of the ventilation run, and jammed it into the crack by the grate's frame. I braced my foot and levered with everything I had. The stone groaned. Not as sound, but as motion. The crack widened a fraction. Another thump hit, and the frame shifted again. Lila grabbed the pipe with me. Rafe joined on the other side, teeth clenched, face strained with fear and determination. We levered together. The latch snapped free. The grate swung outward on stiff hinges, opening just enough for a body to squeeze through. Lila went first, slipping sideways through the gap, arms tight, boots scraping against metal. Rafe followed, grunting silently, shoulder catching once before he forced through. I turned, expecting the technicians to be on me. One was. Hands grabbed my packstrap and yanked hard. The sudden pull almost dragged me backward, but adrenaline can make you stronger than you deserve. I twisted, used the wall for leverage, and drove my elbow into his ribs. He recoiled, grip loosening, and I lunged for the opening. I squeezed through as the technician grabbed again, fingers catching my jacket sleeve. Fabric tore. I ripped free and dropped onto the outside ledge. Cold air hit my face like salvation. We were on a narrow shelf carved into the mountain's outer face, overlooking the valley. The view was wrong, beautiful in a way that felt hostile. The grass below looked calm again, the fissures hidden, the shimmer steady, the black stone patches like islands in a silent sea. Lila pointed upward along the rock face, a path. Not safe, but possible. We climbed, hands bleeding on sharp stone, boots slipping on frost-slick patches, bodies pressed close to the cliff. I could feel the infrasound still through the mountain, but the further we got from the chamber, the less it invaded my bones. Behind us, the grate opened again. A technician emerged, then another. They moved quickly, but they were cautious on the ledge. They didn't have the reckless desperation we had. Halfway along the shelf, the rock narrowed to a pinch point, a natural bridge where the cliff face bowed inward and left only a foot-wide path. Lila crossed first, steady, slow. Rafe followed, shaking, eyes wide, arms spread for balance. I stepped onto it last. The technician behind us stepped onto the shelf too. I glanced down and saw the truth that made my stomach twist. Below the pinch point, the cliff scars continued, parallel grooves leading down to the infrasound plate's ledge. This shelf wasn't just a natural route, it was part of their system, a maintained access path, meaning they knew it well. We needed to break their confidence. As I crossed the pinch point, I noticed a section of rock above it that looked fractured. Hairline cracks radiating from a seam. Loose stone, held by cold and habit, waiting for stress to release it. I reached into my pack with my free hand and pulled out the emergency flare, not to signal help. There was none, but to create force. I jammed the flare into the seam and struck it against the rock, twisting until it sparked. The flare ignited with a sudden, violent light, bright even in daylight, and heat poured into the crack like a wedge. The fractured rock responded immediately. Micro cracks expanded. A chunk shifted outward a fraction. The technician's eyes widened. He stepped back instinctively. I shoved the flare deeper with my trekking pole and leaned my weight into it. The rock gave. A slab the size of a door broke loose and fell away from the cliff, tearing down along the seam and crashing onto the shelf behind me, blocking it in a jagged pile. The technician leapt back, barely avoiding being struck. Dust erupted, and for a moment the shelf disappeared in a cloud of grit and light. When the dust cleared, the path behind us was severed. Not forever, but long enough. We didn't stop to admire it. We climbed hard, pulling ourselves up to a higher ravine where snow gathered in pockets and the air tasted clean. The rock underfoot became more stable, more natural. The shimmer below faded as we gained altitude, and then, at last, sound returned. Faintly, at first, the scrape of our boots on stone, the harsh rasp of our breath. Rafe let out a raw, stunned laugh that broke into a cough. Lila made a quiet sound, half sob, half exhale, and pressed her forehead to the rock, eyes closed. I stood with my hands on my knees, chest heaving, and listened to the simple miracle of the world behaving normally. But relief didn't last, because when I looked down at the valley, I saw something that stole it away. The infrasound pulses were still visible in the environment, not as sound but as motion. The grass shifted in synchronized rings, subtle, precise. The black stone patches vibrated with each cycle like a drumhead. And on the ledge where the emitter sat, a figure stood in profile, one of the technicians, staring up at us. He wasn't reaching for a weapon, he wasn't shouting, he was holding something small in his hand, angled toward the sky. A transmitter. And then, far away, above the ridgeline, I saw it, a thin, dark shape moving against the clouds. A drone. It circled once, slow, deliberate, as if confirming our position. Lila's voice, finally audible, came out hoarse and tight. "They're not letting this go." Rafe swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the drone. "They erased the map," he said. "They can erase us." I tightened my grip on Hartwell's notebook, feeling its waterlogged weight like a responsibility I hadn't asked for. "We're leaving," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. "We get to Tomas. We get beyond their boundary. And we don't stop moving until we're somewhere a drone can't follow without being seen." And we turned and started up the ravine toward the ridge, the wind now loud in our ears, the crunch of snow sharp underfoot, the world finally giving us the sounds it had stolen. But as we climbed, one thought kept returning, colder than the air. If a valley can be made to go silent, then silence isn't an accident, it's a tool. And somewhere behind us, in that forbidden bowl erased from maps, someone still had their hand on the switch.